thank you. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 budget workshop number 2. Due to the COVID-19 and in accordance with the latest Alameda County Health Order and with the Governor's Executive Order N2920, which suspends portions of the Brown Act, this meeting will be conducted remotely. In compliance with said orders, a physical location has not been provided for the meeting. These measures will only apply during the period in which the state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing. All board members are participating via teleconference. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director Katz.
Present.
Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Mellon.
Present.
Director Patterson.
Present.
Director Young.
I'm here.
President Lenny.
Here.
I'm working on my video. I don't have it yet, so I'm here.
Okay. Thank you. If members of the public wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard at the beginning of the meeting. Comments on agenda items will be heard when the item is up for consideration, or probably at the end of the meeting in this case. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. The secretary will call each speaker in the order received. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. However, I have the discretion to amend this time based on the number of speakers. The secretary will keep track of time and inform each speaker when his or her allotted time has concluded. Clifford, I'm going to turn this over to you.
We have 3 speakers for public comment.
Okay.
Right.
And
And so we're going to, actually, we have 4. So we're going to start with Melanie Light. And Melanie, I am going to allow you to talk. If you can unmute your mic. And you will have 3 minutes starting now.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today. Good morning, President Lenny, General Manager Chan, and board members. My name is Melanie Light, and I chair the Orinda Firewise Council, and I also serve on the brand new Commission to Promote Wildfire Prevention and Infrastructure, the Supplemental Sales Tax Oversight Committee in Orinda. I know you're probably aware of the recent discussions in Orinda amongst us residents about the dead trees around San Pablo Reservoir and on EBMUD lands abutting Orinda. Well, Orinda is woke to the threat of wildfire. Over the past 2 years, as the news of the destructive wildfires in our areas have taken lives and property, and the neglect of PG&E has come to light, the residents of Orinda have learned that our own town can be taken out by a wildfire that would come from the Briones area and EBMUD land in only a few hours, land that is clearly marked on your master plan report. Since then, we have taken the fast track to action. We are organizing our neighborhoods into Firewise groups. We have engaged the city, and we've passed a supplemental sales tax specifically to make our homes wildfire resilient. And we know that EBMUD takes its responsibility to manage our water and to protect the watershed seriously. I personally am grateful every day for clean and plentiful water, which I have to say tastes fabulous compared to other waters. So I understand what you're doing, and I'm grateful. But EBMUD also has a moral and fiduciary responsibility to prevent a wildfire on its land that could result in the loss of property, but more importantly, the loss of life. Many, many people have a lot of anxiety about this. And when we look out over San Pablo Reservoir or other EBMUD lands, it's really frightening to think that a PG&E kind of disaster could happen here. I don't want my husband to be a widow due to inaction, and I don't want my children to have to tie up their lives in a ridiculous class action suit because not enough was done to mitigate wildfire fuel. EBMUD has it within its power to ensure this does not happen through immediate action. So I'm new to understanding how EBMUD functions, but I'm eager to learn more about what you do to prevent wildfires. I don't really see this issue singled out in your budget, even though the magnitude of the potential disaster would give credence to the fact that there should be money specifically set aside to remove fuel, and specifically a plan to remove what could be over 1,000 dead trees around the reservoir alone. It's a big job that requires some dedicated attention. To that end, I would like to ask you about the details of your plan to mitigate the wildfire threat. We know that you have already cut down 290 dead trees, but honestly, that seems like a drop in the bucket compared to what we can visibly see, and the fact that trees will continue to die at a rapid clip. Can you
Ms. Light,
please
your
update
3 minutes have
plan?
ended. Can you please wrap up?
Okay, well, I have a request here for lots of documentation and information about your wildfire plan, and specifically under item FF31, I'd like to have the last 3 years of those plans to, as well as any other documents. And we would like to enter into a positive and productive relationship with you, just as we have with all the other agencies around here. And it's not a question of when a wildfire will happen. It's not a question of if a wildfire will happen, it's when, right? It's coming. We need to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have,
Clifford, we have more commenters in the same topic.
we have
Probably, yes.
probably, I just wanted to, I heard Ms. Light state that she wanted to request records. If she could submit those records to the secretary, if she could submit that request to the secretary's office for those records, for a public records request.
Am I still speaking?
No, I was going
Yeah,
on to
I
the
am.
next speaker. Did you have something else?
No, can I have a contact information for that, please?
Yes, it's Risha, RISCHA .COLE at EBMUD.com.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If we were in person, we would direct you to a staff person to take all this from you. So I'm sorry, it's a little more challenging. Marguerite, did you want to comment or?
No, if there's other speakers on the topic, but I think Clifford is prepared to make a brief remark following public comment on this topic. I was expecting it this afternoon, not this morning.
The next speaker.
All right, next speaker.
The next speaker is Eric Larson. Eric, I am going to unmute your mic. You should be allowed to speak now, and your time starts now.
Oh, thank you. This is Eric Larson, President, AFSCME Local 444. I would like to provide comment on the budget workshop after the close of the presentation, please.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you back then. Thank you, Eric.
Next speaker is Ken Light. Going to unmute your mic, and your 3 minutes start now.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Ken Light. You can hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Ken Light. I'm a member of the Via Farrell and La Cuesta Neighborhood Firewise Council, part of the 1,500 homes that are a part of the Firewise organization that has been organized in Orinda. I come to this meeting, ask you to be part of the solution and join our Orinda neighborhoods that have been working feverishly to prevent a wildfire that can engulf our town. To date, we have removed 150 tons of flammable fuel from our community. Our community voted and raised our sales tax in November so we might have more funds available for wildfire mitigation. We've created in our neighborhoods and town a common wheel of creating a safer and more resilient community. When I take hikes on your trails, I carry my annual trail pass use permit, permit number 996462, obeying your rules, signing into your...
Ken, we lost you there. You're,
He muted, I believe he muted himself.
There we go.
there you go.
Okay.
Sorry. When I take hikes on your trails, I carry my annual trail use permit, permit number 996462, obeying your rules, signing into your trail register. But I, like many of my fellow Orindans, have noticed that your watershed property has been neglected to the point that we are scared that EBMUD will probably end up like PG&E, a public utility in crisis. If you don't meet the threat of wildfire on your properties in our county, 209 trees removed is a small number in comparison to what we are seeing and worrying about. We have been good citizens in regard to your rules. When we have been in a drought, we watched our water use. I even put a brick in my toilet and low-flow shower heads so we could use less water, and we eventually got a few low-flow toilets installed. I didn't balk when you raised your water rates because we are being good at conservation. You are the guardians of providing us clean water. When we turn on the spigot, we are grateful to have safe, clean water. But I come to you with a plea to look beyond water delivery and realize that your good name and the faith we have in East Bay Mud is at risk. It simply will take a lightning strike on your property, a spark from a truck, a dying pine tree falling on an electrical wire for you to become responsible for lives, homes, and property lost in our town. Just this morning, it was announced that the Northern California wildfire that killed 4 people and destroyed more than 2,000 buildings last year was sparked when tree branches came into contact with Pacific Gas and Electric power lines. Investigators with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection seized equipment belonging to PG&E in the weeks after the Zog fire tore through the rural communities in Shasta and Tehama counties last September and October. After a meticulous and thorough investigation, CAL FIRE has determined that the Zog fire was caused by a pine tree contacting electrical distribution lines owned and operated by PG&E. We are here today to ask you to move quicker, move with more diligence, and heed our call for action in removing dead and dying trees and make your neglected watershed properties the bucolic and safe properties that they should be. I would urge the directors to take a drive out to Orinda and the surrounding East Bay Mud properties and see for themselves. I think you will fully understand why 209 trees is nothing given the wildfire threat we face in our town. Please don't ignore our call to action and step up now, and don't allow the good name of East Bay Mud to become synonymous with PG&E and the problems they face because of your lack of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Light. We have another speaker?
Yes, we do. We have Rachel Duclos. I am going to unmute your mic. Are you speaking on a non-agenda item or are you speaking on the budget presentation?
I'm speaking on the same topic as Melanie Light and Ken Light.
Okay, I'm going to start your time now. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'm Rachel Duclos. I'm a member of the executive board of the Orinda Firewise Council, and I'm also a resident of Sleepy Hollow neighborhood in Orinda. Specifically, I live on Bear Ridge, which I know you know is vulnerable to fires coming from the Briones direction, up and over the hill into my neighborhood and down into Sleepy Hollow. So I personally feel very vulnerable with any issues that could be coming from Briones. I also want to describe to you what could happen with our Sleepy Hollow Elementary School if a wildfire were to sweep up and over the ridge and down into Sleepy Hollow. So it's a K-5 school. And obviously it's here in Sleepy Hollow with narrow roads for evacuation. So what we've been told as parents, I have an 8-year-old there. What we've been told as parents is that the entire school will go into the multipurpose room, and that one building will be defended if a fire sweeps down toward and threatens the school. And they've installed a 10,000-gallon water tank immediately adjacent to the multipurpose room, in addition to the fire hydrants that are there. But what they've asked us to do as parents is to leave the neighborhood and leave our children behind, rather than panic and crowd the roads to the school. I do believe our chief says that their plan is extremely safe for the children. And I actually do believe it, but I want you to picture what it would be like as a parent to have to flee your neighborhood while your young children are hunkering down in a building that's being defended by the fire department. I mean, I know that nobody wants an entire community of children to be traumatized like that. And I just wanted to paint that picture of what we've been told to do. So we all know that we need to dramatically pick up the pace for all of the fire abatement issues. That's removing trees, defensible space around our homes, hardening our homes, getting rid of the dead scraggly stuff that's been neglected. We all know that we have a part, and I would like EBMUD to get on board with dramatically picking up the pace on removing the dead trees. I personally have done the work that I can personally do. I have defensible space. I have a fire-safe roof. I am removing brush from my the beds surrounding my house, and my property has been completely cleared except for oaks. I also want to point out that if a fire were to threaten Sleepy Hollow and Orinda, we are putting the lives of first responders at risk, and they are going to work like crazy to save our homes and our lives. And we need everybody, cities, neighborhoods, and agencies to get on board to give our first responders a fighting chance to save our homes and our lives.
Ms. Duclos, your 3 minutes have ended. Can you please wrap up?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I can
Speaking.
I can quickly respond. First, I want to thank all
And
the
actually, Clifford, may I first?
Certainly.
Let me turn it over. So we have, just so folks know, because this is public comment, and I guess it's related to the agenda in a way because we spend resources to manage the watershed, have heard from dozens of Orinda residents over this past week. And just want to say that, I personally share the concern that y'all have expressed, and at the same time, hope that we can share with you the collaboration, and we have plans to do so, the collaboration that we undertake on an ongoing basis with the Moraga-Orinda Fire District, state agencies and others to, manage our watershed for the protection of our neighbors and for the protection of our water supply, which of course could be very negatively impacted by wildfire in the watershed, and have plans to address the supplemental tax oversight board that Ms. Light mentioned in April, and we'll also be agendizing this for a future meeting of our planning committee. And with that, let me turn it over to Clifford.
Yeah, I'll just add that, this is something that's been budgeted for decades to keep pace and remove trees with the tree mortality. And, over the years, we've removed 5,000 trees, on average 250 a year. This year, just since December, we've removed 229 trees. And what you're hearing from the residents is true. I mean, we have seen an increase in tree mortality. We're not exactly sure of the cause, but it could be related to drought. It could be related to a bark beetle infestation, or possibly other causes. And as Director Young mentioned, we are partnering. We're meeting with CAL FIRE and other specialists. We will be going to the community on April 14th to update the community on our efforts and changes that we might be making because of the increase in mortality. And also, as Director Young noted, we will be coming to the Planning Committee next month to give the board an update as well.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and get started with the rest of our workshop.
Okay, well, good morning, and I think Jeanette is going to pull up the presentation, but we're holding our second budget workshop to discuss our fiscal year 22 and 23 budget and rates. As I shared back in January at our first workshop, we took into consideration the impacts of the current pandemic, not only on the district, but the regional economy and our customers. And so for the water and wastewater systems, we're proposing a rate increase of 4% for each year. Now for the water system, this is lower than we had previously shared with the board during the last budget cycle. And for the wastewater system, the rates that we're proposing is the same as what we had previously proposed. We believe that this budget proposal strikes the right balance between the economic reality of what we're seeing around us, while still moving forward with our most critical projects and continuing with our maintenance of the systems. Next slide. So this is the agenda for today's workshop. I'll go over the introductory slides. Then we'll discuss our budget priorities and summarize and follow up on questions from the first workshop. We have time for a short break if needed. And after the break, we'll go over our recommended rates and charges. And then we'll have time at the end for any board discussion. We did send to the board our draft Prop 218 notice for your review on March 11th. And at the end of the workshop, if the board agrees with our proposal, we'll issue the Prop 218 notice to our customers. Also, I'll just note that we'll stop at the end of each section for any questions. Next slide. So within the next 2-year budget, on May 22nd, 2023, East Bay MUD will turn 100. And in those 100 years, we've gone through a lot, especially in the past few years, from the pandemic to wildfires and public safety power shutoffs that you heard about, droughts and economic crises. And throughout those 100 years, we continued to serve the community and work towards building a sustainable and resilient system. Next slide. So before East Bay MUD was East Bay MUD, the East Bay was served by many private water companies, the largest of which were the Contra Costa Water Company, the Peoples Water Company, and the East Bay Water Company. Our community was built around water. Take, for instance, the College of California, which was formed in 1853, right here in downtown Oakland. When they were looking for a new location for their college, they picked Berkeley because of the water supply from Strawberry Creek. Now, to run the water system, they formed the College Water Company. When the College of California merged with the State University and became UC Berkeley, the College Water Company became the University Water Company. That company was sold to 2 people who formed the Berkeley Real Estate and Water Works Company. One of those 2 people was Henry Berryman. They installed pipes and built a reservoir where our present-day Berryman Reservoir is located. And there's a street in Berkeley named after Berryman. But the Berkeley Water Works had insufficient supply, so they sold to the Alameda Water Company. But for the Alameda Water Company, the customers complained about the cost of water, and the Alameda Water Company was having financial problems. So they reorganized and were eventually purchased by the Contra Costa Water Company. There are dozens of stories like this. But the theme for all these private water companies was that of unreliable, expensive, and poor water quality. So the voters approved the MUD Act in 1921, and East Bay MUD was formed 2 years later. And what you see in the slides in the photos, starting from the upper right and going clockwise, is a town that was built during the construction of Pardee Dam, the construction of the first McCullamy Aqueduct, construction of the dam, and finally the celebration on top of Pardee Dam when it was completed in 1929. Next slide. So looking at these photos, some things are the same, but a lot has changed. We still have infrastructure that is well over 100 years old that we're dealing with today. But today we do our work differently. We're innovating. We have new pipe materials, we use satellites to find leaks, and sensitive instruments to monitor our infrastructure. Our employees are working smarter. We're operating with less impact on the environment. We have plans for our infrastructure, our water supply, water quality, and finances to ensure that we're sustainable and resilient. And we hold ourselves to the highest standards. This budget supports our continued investment into the water system. Next slide. And how we handle wastewater has also changed in the last 70 years. Before East Bay MUD, millions of gallons of raw sewage was dumped into the bay each year. It was so bad that the newspapers called it the Big Stink. The photo on the left shows a plant in 1951, and the photo on the right shows what the plant looks like today. You heard last October and November the infrastructure challenges we have with the wastewater system. Like the water system, the budget cycle continues to make investments to improve the system and meet the objectives in the Integrated Wastewater Master Plan. So the 100th anniversary is something to celebrate and something to be proud of, and we'll talk about ideas later in the presentation. But it's also a time to remember why we were formed in the first place, and to talk about our commitment to our customers and the community and the employees and the people who built and maintained our systems. And as we look forward, our work, including our plans in this budget, has and will set us up for the next 100 years and more, and the challenges we'll face, including climate change and all the impacts associated with it. Next slide. And with that, I will pass it off to Sophia Skoda, our Director of Finance, to go through our budget priorities.
Good morning, Board of Directors. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the entire finance team, the entire senior management team, and all of the staff in various departments that have worked very hard over the last several months to pull together this budget. And we'll start off with what were our priorities as we move forward in putting this budget together. So as a reminder to the public, our budget board priorities over the last several years have been laid out in our strategic plan. And the budget priorities for the fiscal years 22 and 23 biennial budget. And again, as a reminder for the public, our fiscal years start on July 1st and then end at the end of June the following year. And they are titled with the year that the fiscal year ends in. So it's fiscal year ending. So fiscal year ending 22 and 23 are the next 2 years that are coming up. And the budget priorities for this recommended budget are to continue our investments in and maintenance of our aging infrastructure. And this is a theme that you're going to hear throughout the rest of this presentation, because really what we've looked to do in this budget is to balance the current realities of the many businesses, families, and individuals who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, weighing that reality with the realities of the need to press forward with our continued investments in maintenance of our system and in improving the reliability and renewal of our system as we enter our next 100 years. So again, this budget priorities are the continued investments and continuing in our plans for long-term financial stability as we go into an uncertain future with climate change and many other changes before us. Next slide. So the themes of this budget are sustainability and resilience in all aspects of our strategic plan, and also the need for a cautious, realistic, and flexible outlook. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means on the next page. So when we talk about cautious, we are again considering the pandemic impacts on our regional economy, our state economy, our national economy. We're looking very specifically at our water sales. We are not sure yet what the future looks like with regards to even the next year with respect to drought. And we also are looking at the reality of the highest level of delinquencies that we've ever seen, given the impacts on individuals and businesses. We also are taking a realistic approach in recognizing that there is financial stress on our region, on families, on local agencies, and we've worked very hard to reevaluate our spending priorities and our strategies. We also have tried to make sure that this budget is flexible, that it enables us to adapt both in our current environment and in what we might face over the next 2 years, while still continuing to move forward with critical planned work. Next slide. So I'd like to just take a few slides to go over a recap of what we covered on January 26th in workshop number 1, starting on the next slide. So what we did at that first workshop on January the 26th was to provide an update on real pandemic impacts at the federal, state, and local level. And so we provided the type of information, like that Oakland has basically had furloughs for staff, that many of the cities actually in our service area have cut wages for staff, that the state has done the same. And we made sure to provide that information so that we were, very openly sharing with everyone in our community that we were well aware of what is going on. We also reviewed at that meeting the fiscal year 22 and 23 budget development and assumptions, which include what we were proposing for our capital improvement program, and looking at what were then preliminary assumptions for rate planning, which were 4% and 4% rate increases on both the water and wastewater side for each of those fiscal years. I would like to note that working very hard, we did cut by 20% in each year the rate projection on the water side. So in other words, when we looked at this 2 years ago, we had been projecting 5% and 5% for 22 and 23 on the water side, and we brought those down to 4% and 4%, reflecting the reality of where we are. At that workshop, we also provided some follow-up information on our system capacity charge. And again, for members of the public, that is the charge on the water side for new homes and businesses that connect onto our system that allow us to recoup the investment that has been made by all of our existing ratepayers in our systems, and allows us to use that investment essentially to reinvest in our system. Next slide. So now we're going to be moving into the phase where we talk about the recommended budget. Next slide. So just as an overview again, we are looking to balance the economic realities and the struggles of our customers with the need to move forward with key infrastructure. This again is a theme for two reasons. One, it's to remind members of the public that are concerned about infrastructure that we are moving forward, that we are, all of our key projects continue to move forward. And also a reminder to those that are concerned about the impacts to individuals and the public that we do need to keep pressing on, that much of our infrastructure is in need of replacement, and that to do the right thing, we need to move forward with that, and that we need to continue to move forward also with key maintenance activities on our watershed lands and of our infrastructure. So with respect to the key initiatives that we're looking at with respect to moving forward with, we keep in mind water affordability. And so again, we've got rate increases 20% lower in both fiscal years 22 and 20% again in fiscal year 23 lower than we had projected. We are moving forward with ongoing maintenance and key infrastructure investments. And we are also including funds in this budget for racial justice and social equity initiatives, including our Ranger internship program. And General Manager Clifford Chan will talk a little bit more about that later. We also have enhancements to our customer support program, and we also have funding for us to continue our pursuit of looking at how to best deal with technical and emerging issues as part of our wastewater treatment plant operations. Next slide. So if we actually look at the numbers for the fiscal year 22 and 23 budget, we're talking about a 2-year total appropriation of $2.25 billion. This chart below breaks it down by operations, debt service, and capital. And then it shows the total by water, wastewater, and then again, the total between water and wastewater for each of the fiscal years. And then it adds up to the 2.25 billion number that I stated in the bottom right hand. We'll show this graphically in a different way coming up on the next slide. And so what you'll see here on the left is that about 85%, a little bit less than that, of that 2.25 billion is on the water side, and a little over 15% on the wastewater side. And if you look at the pie chart on the right, what it shows is that between capital appropriations of 42% and debt service of 22%, that 2/3 together is about capital. So in other words, our budget is about capital, largely about capital. Next slide. So with regards to the drivers of our capital improvement program and our priorities, as a reminder again for the public, our priorities are informed by detailed plans, studies, and our own experience from operating and maintaining our system. When we look at fiscal years 22 and 23, this is a focus budget on renewal. It's not about expansion. We have sufficient capacity in our system for the growth in multifamily residential projects, the increased density that we're seeing, particularly in the areas of Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, and this is about renewal of that infrastructure. So General Manager Clifford Chan talked earlier about the history of our district. Well, many of the pipes that are serving parts of our community are more than 100 years old, because we, again, were made up of districts that were older than we are, obviously, today. In terms of priority, we are always looking at safety, reliability, and water quality. And all of those things continue to support our sustainability and resilience goals. Next slide. So when we look at our 5-year capital improvement program, again, you'll see on the water side, about $2 billion over the next 5 years in capital. And on the wastewater side, it's $250 million, so $250 million that are being spent there. And so if you look on the water side, this is an increase of about 7% over our prior 2020 to 24 capital budget. All right, next slide. So when we look at our 22 to 26 CIP, we did need to, since we did have a decrease in the water rates, have to carefully review our prior capital improvement program, and we did have to reprioritize our projects, looking really at sustainability as a lens. And this is a normal process as part of a budget process. We want to smooth out spending. We want to make sure that we're meeting all of our other goals. And so when we did this, we did have to make some deferrals, essentially, of projects. On the wastewater side, because that rate increase is the same, well, of course, there are always changes in priority, again, based on what we've learned during the prior 2 years. We're not really making any major deferrals to meet our spending target. So if we move again to the next slide. What you'll see here is a graphic visual representation of our water system CIP during fiscal year 22 through 26. And you'll see the gray bars and the blue bars. And the blue bars are the current CIP, and the gray is the previous. And so what you'll see then is that the changes that we're talking about are not so much over the next couple of years, because work that's been planned is going to be continuing to move forward, and that really the impact is in the later years of that CIP. So moving on to the next slide. This shows a little bit of detail as was requested at that last workshop, what's being deferred and what does that look like? And then a second question that was asked in a more detailed question was, well, rather than 4-4, what would a 4-5 and a 5-5 look like? And so the answer is that for a 4% and a 5% increase, that there would be an acceleration in the realm of 12 to 24 months of Alameda Crossings, Leland Reservoir, and Sobrante water treatment plant reliability improvements. And then with respect to the 5-5, it would be, again, those that I just mentioned, plus about 36-month acceleration of the relining of the Lafayette Aqueduct. So again, this slide and these topics that we've been discussing over the last 3 slides are our staff response to what's different than what we talked about a couple of years ago when we were looking at 5-5. Next slide. So when we look at the water CIP by asset class, what you'll see here is that the bulk of the work still is in the pipeline sector, and then a big chunk on water treatment plant work. And again, this work on water treatment plants, particularly for the public, is really about helping us be ready for what we're expecting to be a much wider variety of water quality sources, given the changes in climate and what we might expect over the next couple of years. I think we all really like the taste of our water, and we want to keep it as close as we can to kind of a stasis that we're used to, and the upgrades that we're making at the treatment plants will assist with this. The other projects that we're talking about include improvements to our raw water facilities, reservoirs and pumping plants, and then many other facilities as well. So moving on to the next slide. What we see here is the wastewater capital improvement program by, again, category or asset class. And what you see here is that most of that work really is around aging infrastructure. We know that the plant has a very corrosive environment. Many of our board members had an opportunity to attend a virtual tour of that plant this year. And so again, work here is largely about addressing aging infrastructure, but there is some portion of that budget that is around seismic upgrades. That's the second largest chunk of the work. A slice there to address regulatory compliance issues, and then a slice that represents work on our new dewatering building. Again, for members of the public, if you have an opportunity to attend one of our virtual tours, you'll get to know a little bit about dewatering, and that's the process by which digested sludge is dewatered so that we're not hauling off water as we move to beneficial reuse and other uses for that sludge. Next slide. This slide just represents a summary both on the water system side and the wastewater side in a very kind of short fashion with respect to what the infrastructure improvements actually are. And so what you'll see here on the water system side are pipeline replacement projects, again, water treatment plant upgrades, work on our raw water aqueduct, work on some of our service centers, and again, continuing work on our service lateral replacements. On the wastewater side, as we've said, addressing aging infrastructure, looking at our interceptors and pump station improvements, improvements to our secondary treatment processes. Again, we talked just now on the prior slide about work on our dewatering building and equipment. And then improvements to our power generation system and some of our electrical and control systems that will increase reliability. Some good news on the wastewater side, we just found out this week that we were a recipient of one of the Cal OES emergency grants. So we did receive some grant funding that will be used. Doug Higashi on the wastewater side informed us that we're going to be buying a new generator to replace a very old generator at the wastewater plant that will improve our reliability there. So good news on that side. Next slide. So with regards to staffing in this budget, our total authorized FTEs is remaining flat over the 2-year period. So you'll see there the FY22 and 23 FTEs at about 157 and 156, 2,157 and 2,156. I will note, however, that there are 19 more FTEs being funded in the budget. So while we're not increasing the number of positions, we have increased the number of funded positions. We also wanted to take this opportunity to address a question that was raised during the last workshop with regards to staffing of some O&M and engineering FTEs. And so the question was, there were 232 additional O&M and engineering FTEs since fiscal year 12 that have been added to the budget. And the question was, how many of those are actually currently filled? And the answer is 98% of those are currently filled. So moving on to the next slide. This details the actual recommended staffing. When we look here, you can see there's 9.5. This is the 19 additional funded FTEs that we talked about. So you'll see the additions, where those are coming from, some conversions and some deletions that overall lead to that net additional 19 FTEs funded compared to the prior budget. So at this point, I'd like to hand the microphone, I guess, or the Zoomophone back to General Manager Clifford Chan, to talk a little bit about essentially our efforts around diversity, equity, and development. So Clifford, all you.
And maybe before we do that, we can pause and see if there are any questions about this first portion of the budget workshop.
Thank you.
President Linney or the board members, any questions?
I don't have any at this time.
Yes, if we could go back to the FTE slide. Actually, the next one that has some of the details about the additions and deletions. Thank you. I understand that there were some problems with the special employment program, the way it existed well over 15 years ago. I'm surprised that we have it still in our FTE here. What has this classification been used for in the last 15 years?
Yeah.
So did you want to take that, Sophia?
Well, actually, why don't you go ahead, Clifford?
Yeah, so that program's been around a while. I mean, we originally had 18 SEP positions. And we've looked at the program and we've really reimagined that program over the years. But as we reimagine the program, the goal has really stayed the same, which was to grow a more diverse candidate pool. And so while we haven't filled the SEP positions, A few years ago, we did convert some of those positions as part of our technical trades apprenticeship program. We also added some LT Ranger Naturalist intern positions. And then what you're going to hear about shortly in this budget cycle, we're funding positions for additional Ranger Naturalist positions, as well as grounds maintenance positions. So at the end of it, and after a few deletions, we'll still have 9 SEP positions. So we're looking at how we can, relook at the SEP program to meet the objectives, but look at different types of opportunities for us to bring in that more diverse candidate pool into the district.
Thank you for that outlook. Yes, I know that the SCP delivery as it occurred had issues, but I think reimagining it and re-envisioning how we can meet today's needs. I recall that there may have been up to 15 FTE during the height of that program, and I think repurposing around that same allocation in the long term will be important. And so I would like to, while it's hard to track it on this chart, I would like to make sure that there's no net loss and that we eventually regrow, not necessarily in one package of a program, or rather not necessarily in one specific unit, but the more that we can think about these ways of repurposing the goals of the special employment program as you've described, I'd like to encourage that and to see that. One other question I have is I can't tell on this chart if we are still adding an additional crew for pipeline rebuild. Is that occurring, or is that shown off this chart somehow?
Yeah, we're not adding another crew. Our goal right now for the next 2 years is to put in 22.5 miles. And I think what you saw last year and where we're tracking right now, the 12 crews we did last budget cycle, we did add a couple of crews, and they are tracking, if you straight line it out, well above that goal. So there's no need to add additional crews to meet our pipeline replacement targets.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like for further consideration of how pipeline rebuild could go further. I think we have talked about that as a board in the past, and it may be that some of our major capital investments, as you've presented to us, are simply more important and more urgent than the general work of pipeline rebuild. So that's an issue I'd like to continue to hear more about before we finalize this. Thank you.
Okay, and we do provide the board an update, and last year was in July, an update on our pipeline rebuild program, and we plan to do that every year, so you'll hear another update on our pipeline rebuild program. And when you look at the budget, it's a good balance between our pipeline replacement program and the spending on the pipeline, which you see is the largest portion of our capital budget, and then work on the water treatment plants. Director McIntosh?
Hi, good morning. Can we go back to slide 20? And forgive me if I missed something. I was having Zoom issues. So I don't really understand this slide. This slide shows the projects deferred at 4% rate increase, correct?
I think that the easiest way, I think that, Jimmy was asked to kind of create a graphical representation of the deferrals. To me, the easiest way is just to say it verbally, which is that at 4% and 5%, if it was a decision were made to increase the rates rather than 4.4 as currently recommended to 4.5, then the Alameda Crossings, Leland Reservoir, and Sobrante water treatment plant reliability improvements that are all shown on this chart as well. So I think it's Sobrante is the third bullet. The 6th bullet and 7th bullet are Leland Alameda Crossings. Those would be accelerated by 12 to 24 months. And if
at 5%.
At 4 and then 5, 4/5.
All right.
And at 5.5, those would also be accelerated. And in addition, the work on relining of Lafayette Aqueduct number 1 would also be accelerated, and that would be accelerated by out of where it currently is by about 36 months. So that's the difference between 4.5 and 5.5 is the major. I think that Jimmy was just trying to be responsive to what major projects have been deferred since the last time that you saw this, 2 years ago. But, some of those decisions, as we've talked about, are also made, with regards to what's most important. I can't remember which board member had said that earlier, but there's just sort of a process you kind of, over the 2 years, you also learn something and you think about, where we would want to go. But I think that the simplest way is to basically say, if a decision were made rather than 4.4 to go 4.5, that the major projects that would be accelerated essentially would be Sobrante, Leland, Alameda Crossings, and if it were 5.5, then Lafayette, relining of Lafayette Aqueduct would also be accelerated. So it's
all right. I guess what's confusing is the different color bars.
Yeah.
Very confusing. So, all right.
And the colors are more like categories of projects. So you can see that the pink are sort of, it shows like a house or a hat looking, and then all the pipelines are kind of the brown, and then the circle reservoirs are blue. So that's I think what engineering is using kind of to try to graphically share the category of projects. So there are everything wasn't taken out of one category essentially in the decisions made about what would get deferred. Everything was kind of reprioritized and looked at, and this is where it fell out.
All right. Is there a slide forthcoming that shows side-by-side comparison, or is this?
No, this is it. Between this and the prior slide is it. So the difference is, I think it's an addition of $74 million over 5 years that would be added if the 4.5 went forward, and so that was also covered in the memo. So that's the difference. It's an acceleration of 12 to 24 months essentially with the 4.5 of those 3 projects, and then with the 5.5, it's those 3 projects plus essentially Lafayette Aqueduct number 1. And we want to thank all of the engineering staff that worked with us. We realize that as finance, we're sort of pushing them to say, hey, listen, if we gave you this, what would you do? And so they're kind of trying to think about, okay, well, how would I do it differently after we already asked you to look at it from one standpoint. So,
all right.
I'm sorry that it's not as clear as it could have been. Sorry.
Thank you.
Are there any
If
other?
there aren't any other questions, why don't we go back to slide 26, where basically I was saying that the budget includes resources for a new Office of Diversity, Equity, and Development, Customer Engagement, and Operations and Maintenance. And if we move to the next slide, basically this was the break, where Clifford just wanted to check in. We have a second break a little bit later. So.
Thank you, Sophia. So one of the budget priorities in this budget cycle is our work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And last year, when I first became general manager, I was asked, and I also looked at where the diversity and inclusion office belonged within this organization. And I looked at other utilities. I looked at other companies, both public and private, to see what they did. And what I found was that the DIO was not usually in the human resources department because the activities of that office cut across the entire organization. Next slide. So our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan is looking at our efforts both internally and externally. And to do this and bring a higher profile to this work, we shared with the board our plans to create a new Office of Diversity, Equity, and Development. And this office is going to help align our work in this area across the organization. Next slide. So the new office, did you skip a slide? Yeah, so the new office will support our commitment to diversity and recruitment and build on our decades-long work promoting economic development and equity through our procurement and contracting practices. Next slide. I think there might be some series here. So you just, maybe. You can fill in the blanks, Janetta. 2 more. So, I looked at lots of articles about new DIO efforts at companies, and how and they described the DIO position being a revolving door. And this was a common question I think Director McIntosh asked is, Derry, do you have enough resources to do your work? And that revolving door that you're seeing outside in other offices was in part because the position, although it reported to either the CEO or general manager of the company, it didn't have the resources or the capability to embed the efforts into the organization. And so what this graphic shows is how the new office will be organized. The office will be staffed by a new special assistant that will report directly to me. And having the DIO office and the CEP, the Contract Equity Office, as part of the group will allow us to work on both our internal and external efforts. And we're also adding, if you look to the right, the Employee and Organizational Development Division, so we can embed the work and the values into the organization. And so for this budget cycle, we're funding 5 more positions compared to the prior budget to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know the slide says 5.5 more FTEs, but it's 5 FTEs. Next slide. So one example of our efforts this budget cycle is to increase diversity in the ranger classification, particularly upcountry. Last year, 3 interns that participated in the summer internship worked on a project and prepared a fantastic report and presentation called Strengthening and Diversifying the Ranger Pipeline. One of the interns was from Merritt College, and 2 were rising freshmen from UC Berkeley and Stanford. All 3 were minorities, and 2 of them were women. Now, among the recommendations was to expand the Ranger pipeline by creating an internal pathway to the Ranger 1 position. Next slide. So this budget includes adding 2 part-time Ranger 1 interns to support our upcountry activities. And if you look at the graphic, that intern position, which is in the middle, that Ranger 1 intern, is a bridge between our existing student intern program and permanent Ranger positions. And again, this was one of the recommendations from last year's report that we believe is going to help increase diversity in the Ranger classification. Next slide. And next, we'll move on to Kelly Zito to talk about our work on customer engagement.
All right, can you hear me? Yes, great, thank you. All right, so good morning, members of the board, staff, and members of the public who might be tuned in. My name is Kelly Zito, and I'm the Public Affairs Director at the district. Today, I'm going to be highlighting a few of the district's community efforts in the proposed FY22 and 23 budget. Risha and Janetta, if you guys could drive the presentation, I would appreciate it. All right, next slide, perfect. Education resources. So as you know, community engagement is central to our work here at the district. From updating our customers about a new pipeline going in on their street, to educating them about our water treatment plants, how they work every day to bring them clean, fresh, great tasting water, all the way to effectively communicating and partnering with the community to ensure that we protect our natural resources for future generations. So in this slide, you can see some of the examples of what we have done recently on our education front. And that is, we've worked to consolidate many of our learning and outreach resources into one place, and we have adapted them to distance learning, which we hope will be one upside to the pandemic, that we've created more virtual tools to expand our reach over time. Here you can see some examples of that. We have our virtual tours of our Orinda plant, our Watershed to Bay publication, our very popular wastewater tour. And then farther down on that same page, you would see links to our water conservation webinars and our requests for speakers and some other items. Next slide, please. This is resources for all ages. So as we all know, we never stop learning, and looking ahead to fiscal years 22 and 23, we're focused on several ways to expand our education efforts. And so this includes updating our K through 12 booklets. So these are the sort of traditionally printed hard copy versions of education resources that provide information about the water cycle, water conservation, wastewater treatment, environmental protection, and other things. So We're going to be working this budget cycle to expand those, to update them, to make them interactive and have them available online so that if teachers need to download them and use them in the classroom, they can, but also have some online opportunities that are a little bit more interactive for teachers to use. So another thing that we're doing is later this summer, we'll be launching our virtual speaker series. And so this is where we have a subject matter expert provide kind of a public mini lecture and public Q&A online at this point, of course, on a certain topic. And so, as I mentioned, we hope to launch this later this summer in June, and we'll be focusing on topics including things like water supply and drought planning, water conservation, infrastructure investment, and emergency planning. We're also increasing our efforts to reach historically underserved communities. And so one way that we're working to achieve this is through our Racial Equity and Justice Project, where community engagement is one of the pilot projects. So this effort is still in process, and we'll be working on this spring and summer. But the goal here is to really make sure that we are meeting everyone in our community kind of where they are and providing them the information that they need. Finally, we hope that all these efforts eventually sort of roll up into what we're calling our Citizens Academy, which is a program to cultivate water savvy community members, people who are active in their neighborhoods and networks, who are informed and up to date on our activities. Next slide. This is supporting the future. So here you can see that our support extends well into the community beyond just the boundaries of our organization. And so in addition to EBMUD programs, we support a number of education and other organizations throughout the service area and upcountry. So this includes things like helping coordinate and judge the entries in the Alameda and Contra Costa Science Fairs, and in addition, providing support and funding for other groups, including the David Brower Center, Community Resources for Science, Peralta Colleges, Rising Sun, and others. So we're going to continue sponsoring groups like these and also look for new opportunities to support other organizations in our area that align with our mission and values. So next slide, please. This is Centennial Anniversary. So this next effort is something that I'm personally very excited about and that General Manager Chan talked about a little bit in his intro, and that is our 100th anniversary that'll be coming up in 2023. So of course, we will have a number of activities and outreach planned leading up to that anniversary, which I think is technically in May of 2023, and happening around that time. And so here you can see some of what makes the district such a critical part of our community, our complex infrastructure and the amazing employees who work every day to bring great water and wastewater services to the East Bay. Next slide, please. So some of our goals around the Centennial are that we really want this to be about our diverse and dynamic community. We play a critical role in providing clean, safe water to the East Bay and protecting San Francisco Bay through our wastewater services. So in working on some overall principles around the 100th, we came up with some ideas about what we want these activities and events to look like. And what we came up with was we really wanted this to be a celebration that is engaging and educational, sustainable, and inclusive of all. And so here's a nice slide of one of our public affairs team members here, Tracy Morales, out at a community event. And again, post-pandemic, we really look forward to being out in the community, connecting with people at various events, tours, workshops, open houses, and other activities. Next slide, please. So some of the themes that have emerged for our community activities and outreach and events around the Centennial are kind of captured here in this little word cloud water drop combo that we created. And so it sort of touches on some of those key messages that are going to be kind of a cornerstone of our Centennial work. And so it's, very familiar to anyone who knows our mission. So it's about protecting the environment, supporting our community and economy, and of course, innovating for the future so that we are resilient and prepared for the next century. Also here you see a nice kind of contrast here between our historical work, photos from our rich history, and then great shots of our current community members and our workforce here in the East Bay. So next slide, please. So these next couple of slides show some of the inspiration behind the work that will go into planning our Centennial. Luckily, we have a number of peer agencies who have celebrated this important milestone, and we're borrowing some of their best ideas. So in this slide, you can see Denver Water turned 100 back in 2018, and they created a new kind of logo and tagline that kind of, again, creates that touchstone with their history, but also looking at innovation for the future. And then, here's a little snippet of an event that they held to kind of unearth a time capsule that I think had been buried around 50 years ago or placed in a hydrant, I guess, 50 years ago. And so we're going to be looking at some of these ideas and efforts as we move forward in planning the centennial. And so the next slide, please. So this is just another example of some of the kind of things that we hope to do, online and in our on our website. So the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission in Maryland, they created this really cool online historical flip book that people can navigate with photos and blurbs about their history, and then their work on building a resilient system for the future. And so again, these are some of the types of tools that we'll be looking at creating for our centennial. So finally, we'll be bringing back to the board our plan for the centennial as we move through this next budget cycle and get a chance to flesh out our ideas and themes into more specific efforts and activities. But I wanted to provide you a little bit of a taste of sort of what we're working on. So with that, I can take any questions. Looks like Director Young.
I'm very excited about the direction that the education program is taking. I have a couple of comments. One is I really like the idea of an academy of our constituents to sort of help us spread the word. I would ask that we not call it the quote unquote citizen academy, maybe community academy or something else, but not the word citizen. The second is around our centennial history. I think it's actually quite important to recognize that our history is also rooted in the destruction of the environment that existed before we all got here, and some sort of recognition of the lands that we occupy, and the natural creeks that we or our predecessors participated in dewatering, so I just think that, like this picture of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, our history is about a bunch of white men that, so in our commitment to equity and, diversity, I think we need to be mindful of how we approach our history in a way that doesn't perpetuate or cover over, the negative, the many positive impacts. Obviously, we all need water. We all live here. We all benefit from it, but didn't come without cost. So some of that would be great to include.
Thank you for that perspective. I think Director McIntosh.
Yeah, hi. First, I am very pleased. I repeat this. Marguerite and I really sort of fought for this early on, that DIO will be reporting directly to the general manager. It's appropriate and long overdue because it is so important. Secondly, I recognize that we are really involved in Alameda and Oakland, specifically when it comes to community engagement for our community outreach. But I continue to state we need to do more in West Contra Costa County. We're at the tip, but we're on the I-80 corridor, and there's such a need and there's such a void there. So I really want to see us moving more into West Contra Costa County. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that. But Director Mellon?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, on this centennial type of thing, we keep talking about how much we're charging ratepayers and how much we're spending money on this and that. I'm not real keen on spending a lot of money on some centennial inspiration or whatever. As far as I'm concerned, we can do some nice brochures. We don't have to have lots of meetings. We can do some logos, but forget it. I am not interested in spending money on that. I'm more interested in spending money on infrastructure. And you can count on me voting against anything that looks like it will puff up the rates and the like. Secondly, on the Citizens Academy, Ratepayers Academy, whatever, this is long overdue. John Coleman and I at one point in time raised it. And I believe that if you want to look to an example, DSRSD has done academies, and academies help us. And if we're going to spend money on a centennial, we'd be better off spending money on these academies, getting our ratepayers to understand what we are. So I'm not real keen on this at all as far as the centennial, but I am as far as an academy for folks to understand where the water is, how it goes, and help them to be better participants in process.
Thank you, Director Mellon. And I'll just add, that conversation about spending money on the centennial is absolutely a conversation that we had internally, and we, among staff, agreed we do not want to spend money on a one-day celebration of our 100th year. We want to make sure that whatever we do can be reused as part of the academy, as part of other efforts. So this is very much intentional effort not to waste ratepayers' money on a celebration for our 100th year. But your feedback, on this and our efforts will be greatly appreciated. But we absolutely agree with your comments that this is not about spending money to celebrate.
Keep it short and simple. It's a wonderful old phrase, KISS.
Agreed, Frank.
I want to give a little bit of a counterpoint to Frank on this, because in part because he's just so vociferous about it. I feel like he needs to, but I don't see that. I kind of like what I'm hearing about the centennial inspiration and messaging that's done there. I don't see it as taking money away from the pipeline rebuild, but I don't see it as, hey, aren't we great? We've made 100 years, we supply this water. I think there's an opportunity as part of our education budget, as part of telling our customers, and I like the term in customer engagement what we're doing here is engaging them. We've come a long way from the white guys laying pipes and no EIRs and things like that. And I think it's an opportunity to inspire us for the next 100 years to do things differently, to do things better, as we have done recently, and again, it's not a celebration for aren't we great, but really an inspiration, as it says, for what we can be and what we should be going forward, and as part of our ongoing education and an opportunity, as these things always are or should be, as a way to get people's attention a little bit more than just the usual kind of discussion that we do. So I like what I'm hearing.
With all due respect, I appreciate what you're saying, but really and truly, folks are going to look at what are you spending the money on, and perception becomes a reality. And the more that they perceive that we're spending money on our grandiose plans and things, as opposed to getting the pipe in the ground.
Have a luncheon on the Pardee Reservoir again, if that's what you're, or
yeah, let's suspend the upcountry barbecue then.
Yeah. Let me chime in a minute, please.
Go ahead, Joe, and then John.
I wanted just to say that there's a place for all of this, because when you talk about the 100-year history of East Bay Mud, it needs to be blended. What we found, even in looking at the city of Oakland history, of the differences that occurred and when they happened, and really changing the landscape to blend them in so that it became notable that once when Oakland was being considered for an all-American city, it had not reached that status as it reflected on the community, its engagement, its makeup, and the historical contributions that have been made by people. So I think there's a place for it. I don't think it costs a lot of money. It does take some time of the staff in explaining it. But back in the 50s at Defirmary Park, history was made when I was a part of that staff because they had what they called a youth workshop. And out of that youth workshop, invitations went out to the general manager of East Bay Mud, PG&E, all of the semi-private public agencies that affected the community and what their workforce looked like. And those changes came about after World War II with that emphasis on it. So your Wainwrights, your Tinsley, Bill Tinsley, the Kinchins, all of those people who were part of 444, and that's been an expression on the part of 444, all came out of West Oakland after the general manager made a visit, even into his office where his secretary or chief assistant became a black woman out of McClymonds. I wanted just to say that to say history started somewhere, and it isn't something that's happening now in the 21st century. It happened back then. And somewhere we have to have that included in the infrastructure going forward. I was part of that because I was a part-time worker at the infirmary when these things went on. And we took our youth from West Oakland, looking at its community and its engagement. We took that to the Northern California Youth Council, where they became officers and infiltrated, to the State Conference on Youth, the Governor's Conference, and even from West Oakland to Washington, D.C. And I think it's important somehow when I speak and go to NAACP meetings and whatnot, I remind people of this. I lived on 51st Street, 53rd Street in Oakland in an old Victorian that my grandmother owned. And I could see back in the 50s and the late 40s out over the bay and remember the stench and remember all the things that were happening. But also remember who became a part of East Bay Mud moving forward, getting into the employment ranks. No longer were their applications put in file 13, but they were moved into the Vista. And these are people who your own employees recognize and remember. You now have the black group in East Bay Mud Employees Network. And these things all grew out of what I'm talking about, and they become important. I was part of the Asian movement with Danny Wan when we talked about Asian Pacific Islanders and their effect and what they brought to East Bay Mud. So I just want to emphasize where I've been over all this time shouldn't be shuffled off to the side or be less important, but it's not costly. It needs to be blended so we know we have a history. That's all I want to say.
Director, thank you. Director Coleman?
Great, thank you very much for allowing me to make the comments. I understand where everybody's coming from, and I'm coming more in the case of where Doug and Bill are coming from. First of all, I'm not concerned about us wasting money. If most agencies I've dealt with, EBMUD is probably one of the most prudent agencies when it comes to spending money on outreach and self-promotion of any agency I've ever dealt with. So I'm not really concerned about that. I mean, closely we'll watch the budget, but we have a rich history. We have our blemishes, and we need to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. We need to also talk about what we're proud of. We also need to make our history is our future, and our employees are our future, and our ratepayers are part of our future. And I don't think it's bad to talk about where we came from, where we are, and where we're heading. And that's how I look at what the Centennial Inspiration or the Centennial activities can be. Again, I'm not looking at it being self-grandiosing about EBMUD and, you know, we're all great and therefore everybody needs to follow what we do because what we do is different than other agencies for different reasons. But we have a story to tell, and we have a proud story to tell. And we also have made, as I said before, some decisions that were always not the wisest decisions, similar to what Marguerite was talking about. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it effectively, communicate it effectively, and be proud of what we're doing and where we're heading, and do it in a way that is not going to have an impact on our budget. And that's where I'm coming from. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Director.
Marguerite?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think our history, our history is important, and it's an important part of helping our ratepayers understand this organization that they support with their dollars to bring them water and wastewater. And I don't see us having a parade down Main Street or other things that would be, you know, frivolous, but we do take, you know, the party. I made a joke about the party barbecue a bit ago, but that is an important way that we connect to our upcountry constituents or stakeholders, and you know, as our ward events, as are any number of things that we do. I don't see us going outside of that band of, it's more about how we tune and tone the activities that we always undertake anyway during this, our upcoming 100-year, you know, anniversary. So I'm with Doug and Bill and sounds like John on this. And I bet, Frank, that you're actually really not opposed to that. You just want to make sure that we aren't, you know, spending enough to move the needle on our rates to do it. And doesn't seem to me like we are.
I've said enough.
Maybe we can.
So I'd like to join just to say we'll need an appropriate amount of previews and discussion as the cycle goes forward. You know, we have until 2023 to finalize our plans, just to make sure that we're making wise investments, but also that we're making sure that we're investing enough to make this worthwhile, in addition to covering important and diverse perspectives. So I support the robust customer engagement to help our district and our customers to learn important perspectives and about our region's history so that we can understand where we're going.
So let's move on to the next topic. We have Dave Briggs to talk about the operations and maintenance budget priorities.
Okay, good morning. And Risha, do you want me to advance the slides? Or Janetta? Okay, thank you. Appreciate you accommodating the multi-format here. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, slide 43. And what we're showing here is how staff have worked through the proposed budget to try to find and strike the right balance between district forces and contracting out. And can you see the slide, or is it still? Yeah, they can see the slide. Okay, great. So what's shown here on the slide, and this comports to some of the remarks that Sophia was making a few minutes ago, we've identified 11 positions that are presently vacant and unfunded. These are not new positions, but they are not positions that represent people here right now, of course. So in that sense, they're new. But these 11 positions, which amount to about an estimated $2 million that would be used to offset our FM&O, and the savings from our contracting out and FM&O would be used to fund the labor and equipment costs for these 11 positions. So at the top of the list, 2 heavy transport operators. Sorry about that. 2 heavy transport operators at the top of the list, and below that, 1 heavy equipment operator. These are positions that would be used to directly support our pipeline rebuild program and offset contracting out costs there. Below that, we have 4 concrete finisher positions, 2 at each level, that would be extended LT positions that would be used to offset costs both on the operating and capital side. Below that is a paving raker position that we would utilize as a saw cutter. These are all, the concrete finisher and paving raker programs are in the pilot phase right now, so pending successful completion of these pilot programs, we may be able to offset even more contracting out costs in the future, but we'll continue to run these pilot programs and extend them and gather more data. Below that at the bottom are 2 ground maintenance specialist positions. These would be temp positions, and we've discussed this with the board on a couple of occasions in the last year. These positions would be used to offset our landscape contract with Rubicon to handle our peak workload in the summer. And similar to what Clifford was mentioning earlier with the Ranger program, I see this as another great pathway, ability, or mechanism to get people from the community into our program and get them exposure to East Bay Mud in a professional working environment and get them valuable experience to compete for jobs moving forward in the future. And we are recruiting for this position in partnership with many of our local colleagues. They would include Richmond Build, Civicor, CEO, Rising Sun, etc. So we are looking forward to this program providing all sorts of benefits. Next slide. We want me to do it? Okay, thank you. I'm going to use the arrows. Okay, so this slide 44 summarizes our contracting out and FM&O as of FY20, and contracting out is part of what we do. It helps us handle our peak workload. It handles work that we don't normally do or don't have the expertise or equipment to perform. But of course, we try to minimize that and with using our district forces as much as possible. So what's shown here on the slide is the top 5 of our 14 different types of programs that we contract out for. And at the top of the list are our dump truck contracting out program that utilizes well over 24 vendors. And below that, the next highest one is our paving, striping, and sealing contracting out. That's $4 million lately, the last 2 fiscal years. But of course, that is comprised of work that we have never done at East Bay Mud in the sealing and striping work, as well as payments that we make to other cities that perform our paving. So that number is large, but it is made up of dollars that we either don't do, have never done, or have no control over. Some of these 14 categories are not operating right now or have relatively low dollar figures, but these are the top 5. Overall, the program in these 14 activities represent about 10% of what we do in our operations and maintenance department on a daily basis. So just for context, this is about 10% of our effort on any given day. I mentioned the pilot programs in the concrete and saw cutting area that we hope will reduce contracting out in the future. And it's also important to realize that these millions of dollars that are listed on this slide, these are not single awards that are going to large firms. On average, we have hundreds of vendors that are part of this program. The average PO is a little over $50,000. So this $14 million a year going into this program, so it's coincidentally 14 different types of work and also about $14 million total. These are going to hundreds of small vendors directly and not through a middleman. The spending is also relatively stable. So although it has increased over the past couple of fiscal years, it is scalable to our overall operating and construction budget. So it is a relatively stable amount of contracting out. Now, the next two slides give you some better sense of the connection between FM&O and contracting out and our CEP program and our ability to recruit and a diverse level of employees and provide community benefits. So there's a nexus here that we want to walk through the next couple of slides, and I certainly wanted to thank Bev Johnson for helping me pull all this together. And just at the top of the slide here, you can see that if you look at that whole list of vendors, 83% of them are local, 48% are small businesses, and 38% are comprised of ethnic minority and white women. So there's a large amount of this effort is going into the CEP categories that we're tracking. And our largest contracts have the best CEP numbers. The dump truck services, I think there's about 29 or 30 vendors in that program. 50% of those vendors are ethnic minority or white women. Some of our programs, I think it's, oh gosh, I forget which one it was, but many of them are 100% local business enterprises. So we have some of our larger contracts really do have impressive numbers. Part of this program necessarily involves tracking these vendors and making sure they perform. So just as we expect high things from our employees, we expect high performance from our contractors. So we regularly evaluate and document the performance of these vendors, and we take that into consideration for future contracts. We also have a program that ensures that there's equitable distribution among the vendors within a given program to make sure that the work is paced out and evenly distributed as we monitor the program throughout the years. And I think this is my last slide here, just to give you a sense of the dollars going into the community. And as shown on slide 46, $32 million over the last 3 years has gone in this FM&O and contracting out category in these 14 different programs that we run. $32 million is going into local businesses, 18 million into small, and 15 million into ethnic minorities in the white women category. Now, some of these are not additive dollars. Of course, many vendors and small companies, of course, many of these are owner-operated companies. They're very small. Many of these companies qualify for more than one category, so these dollars are not additive, but it does give you a sense of how much money is going into the community by these categories. The FM&O contracting out world of these 14 different programs represents a big part of all of the CEP program. 25 to 30% of our awards in the FM&O category are associated, let me say this correctly. 25 to 30% of our CEP numbers are associated with our FM&O contracts and contracting out. And these are also given directly to prime contractors. These are not numbers that are derived from secondary or subcontractors. So these are going to small firms that are owner-operated, and every construction company starts out small. And with this regular, predictable type of work that we can get into the community, these small businesses will become medium-sized companies and larger in the future. And it's a great way of making sure that those contractors are viable.
Director Coleman, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, David, for that part of the presentation. I'd like to applaud Beverly Johnson for her efforts on trying to get the business enterprises that you have on the screen more business. I'd just be curious to see at some point a 5-year trend and where things are heading in the categories here to see how it's going. I suspect it's increasing, but we may have an anomaly with the pandemic, I guess, where some of these smaller businesses may have there may no longer be in business. So I'd like to see that. And if there's also a way to extrapolate, maybe an economist has a formula or somebody at the district has a formula, for every dollar that we're spending locally with small business and ethnic minorities or white women, how many multiple jobs are created as a result of that?
Okay, thank you, Director Coleman.
Are you doing a trickle down, John? John, are you doing a trickle down theory?
No, I mean, there's economic formulas that the Biden administration talked about it with their relief package. For every dollar you spend, you basically know how many dollars, multiple dollars are created in jobs. And there's got to be something that can be applied to this that gives us an idea for, let's say we send $32 million, like, as it says in local business enterprises, how many multiple jobs or dollars are created as a result of that in our community?
You're going for the multiplier effect then, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
Director McIntosh?
Question on, so the third category, ethnic minorities / white women. Is there a breakdown? Can you divide that? What's the percentage for ethnic minorities? What's the percentage for white women?
I would have to defer to, I don't know if Bev is listening or if Clifford knows, but I believe when companies fill out these forms that we give them, that those categories are delineated.
Yeah, let's see. I don't know if Beverly Johnson's on. I don't have those numbers offhand right now, but
All right,
we can provide it.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to, Director McIntosh, were you still continuing?
No, I'm done. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage further work on enhancing these outcomes. And I don't think that it requires major deliberation in the amount that we allocate to the budget. I think it requires just further commitment in our senior management and working with our board to come up with new ideas, dust off old ideas, and just see what we can do, working with the team that designs our RFPs and thinking about the way we recommend subcontracting among our prime contractors. So I'd like to see some continued follow up on this at our Finance and Administration Committee. And but I want to support these efforts, and I thank you for bringing this information to us.
Thank you, and we'll bring it up for a future discussion. So we had originally planned a break, but I'm looking at the time, President Lenny, and I think it might make sense to finish on time just to continue, if that's okay with you and the rest of the board.
Is
Okay.
everybody okay with that?
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Works for me.
Sophia, would you like to continue?
Yes. Okay, so we are now moving into the recommended rates and charges piece of the presentation. And the first slide in this section is around our key financial planning assumptions. So we just wanted to cover these briefly. On the consumption side, for fiscal years 22, we've got a planned kind of expected consumption of around 144 MGD, and for fiscal year 23, 146 MGD. FY20 actual water sales were 148 MGD, and so a question might be, why did we not decide to start at 148 if that's where we were? And so one thing that I would say is that, you know, last summer was dry and water use was higher than we had anticipated, A, and then B, we may be going into drought. And if we are, we will be asking customers to reduce water usage. And so in that case, it would not be wise essentially to have a planned higher water sales amount than, you know, we would otherwise expect in a drought type situation. So generally what we want to continue to do is to budget conservatively given the real possibility of droughts and uncertainties relative to economic recovery, et cetera. If we move on to the next slide, this provides a little more detail on a granular level, year by year, water sales, actual versus projected. The actual is the orange, and the purple is what was projected for rate setting. And for many years, there was a gap, a pretty big gap between the orange and the purple. And what we've tried hard to do together, the board and staff, is to bring those lines closer together. And so you can see in recent years, those have been much closer together, and we want to keep them that way. Whenever the orange line is below the purple line, we effectively have a gap in revenue. So that's what I wanted to point out here. Next slide. With respect to our updated rate targets, I think more than one of us has said this during this budget workshop and also during the prior one. We've worked hard, given the current economic landscape, to minimize our rate increase and yet still move forward with priorities to maintain and upgrade our infrastructure. We do want to note that we have labor agreements that are currently expiring and that will be negotiated. And then, of course, there's the recovery from the pandemic. So these are items that, have impact potentially on our budget. Moving forward to the next slide. We just wanted to cover some slides that we had talked about last time, particularly for benefit of those who have not joined us at the first workshop. What have been the actions of other agencies and rate actions that they've taken? So these are agencies that had adopted and implemented rates. So the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission moved forward with an 8% increase on the water and wastewater side in July of 2020. They did have a dramatically expanded customer assistance program to parallel that. Contra Costa Water Company adopted a 3.75% increase in February of 2021. That was expected, as has been mentioned in the January workshop, and they did move forward with that rate increase. The city of Napa implemented approximately a 5% increase, because there's obviously cost of service changes. It's not directly across the board, but around that amount is the average increase in October of 2020. And DSR SD implemented a very small 1.6%, so that's roughly CPI increase in October. Actually, it is the 2020 June CPI. Moving on to the next slide. Many agencies also took actions to have no increase, or they delayed their rate increase. So we talked about Alameda County Water District. They voted this year in December not to increase their rates. How did they move forward? Essentially, they did not implement, the fundamental piece was they did not implement the increased payoff of their pension and OPEB liabilities that they had originally planned. So they also have, as we have been, making conservative assumptions around water demand, around CIP spending, operating budget spending, and so they do also have some built up reserves at this point. The Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agencies, they saw no wholesale increase from the SFPUC, but they've had very high increases in recent years. The city of Hayward delayed their planned 3.1% water increase from October of 2020 to January of 2021. And there was no change to their 4.4% wastewater increase. And their delay cost them very little because it was just a few months. And Marin Water delayed their June 2020 vote on a 4% rate increase, and that's been delayed until this April. So that'll be coming up next month. And then North Marin Water voted to delay their 6% planned increase from July of 2020 to October of 2020. And they are currently reevaluating their 22 through 25 recommendations. On the North Marin side, the staff did let the board know that there would be a reduction in revenue for that short period of time, but that basically there was some CIP that was able to be delayed a little bit. The city of Palo Alto did not increase rates for FY21 and 22, but in discussions with staff, there's potentially a fairly robust increase that would need to be implemented to make up for that. The city of Pleasanton didn't respond to our questions about the fact that they did not increase their rates, and they're not sure what their plans are, but they did delay their cost of service study as a result of the pandemic. So ostensibly any gap essentially would have to be considered as part of that cost of service study. Valley Water voted for no increase for July of 2020, but their increase for 22 could be up to 9.8% per discussions with staff. And then for Zone 7, they voted not to implement their 6.7% planned FY21 increase. And they essentially will have to absorb that from some one-time savings. They also did have some increased demand, again, because of the hot summer, and they also are deferring some work. So a combination of all of those things. Moving on to the next slide. We also just wanted to remind, in the realm of kind of impacts to the budget, that the district does bill on behalf of the cities of Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville for sewer collection services, collecting around $2.3 million each year for those services. Oakland is moving forward with implementing the first phase of their customer assistance program, and Berkeley and Emeryville have not yet committed to any customer assistance program for those charges. The contracts are up in 2023, and the impact on a decision not to renew those would equate to loss of revenue about 0.3% on rates over the long run. So moving on to the next slide, this just shows kind of in a simple slide where we've been with respect to rate increases and where we thought we were going, 5%, 5%. The changes that we've made are reflected here in the proposal of 4%, 4%, and again, no change on the wastewater side. Next slide. What does that look like in terms of actual impacts to single family residential customers? This is a chart that we developed some years ago, and it's part of our Proposition 218 notice that we'll talk about in a minute. It shows 25th, 50th, 75th, 95th, and then the average single family user. So what you'll see here is that the 25th percentile at the end of the 2 years, the increase would result in a bill just under $50 per month. For the 50th percentile, that would be $58 per month. So we're talking about roughly $2 per day for about 50% of our customers. As a note, though, of course, you can see that the average use is 8 CCF, and the 50th percentile use or median use is only 6 CCF. So our average user pays more than 50% of our customers who are paying less than 6. Moving on to the next slide. On the wastewater side, what you'll see here is the single family residential average of 6, again, reflecting the fact that the service area in the West of the Hills area has a slightly lower usage. It also shows the maximum amount that we charge for a single family home, and that's 9 CCF. For members of the public, the reason why there's a maximum on the wastewater side is because at some point, water use is no longer being used in the house, it's being used for outside watering. And so we don't want to charge wastewater treatment charges on outdoor watering. We just want to charge on that which is coming down to our treatment plan in which we are treating. So after the end of the 2-year rate increases, average single family bill will be around $25 with a maximum of $29.18. On the next slide, these show some of the non-residential wastewater treatment rates for customers, restaurants, hotels, hospitals, and retail and office. And so what it shows is a $1 per 100 cubic feet CCF for members of the public, 1 CCF, and the C is for centum. So that's the Latin for 100, and 100 cubic feet is 748 gallons. Next slide. This next slide shows what the wastewater charges are going to be for our wet weather facilities charge. Again, for members of the public, the wet weather facilities charge pays for the operation of our wet weather facilities. We have 3 wet weather facilities that we operate, 1 at our main wastewater treatment plant, 1 to the north, which is just at Point Isabel, where the Costco in Richmond is, and then 1 at Oakport. And essentially what happens is our plant is a biological system. The bacteria can't grow 5 or 10 times overnight just because there was a significant rainfall and all of the infiltration from the cracks in the pipe and so on make it down to the plant. And so we have these facilities essentially while we're working on with our communities bringing down that level of I&I. We have these wet weather facilities that we operate. This is a charge that appears on the property tax bill for people that are in our service area. And there's a small, a medium, and a large size lot, reflecting the fact that more I&I essentially has the possibility to be contributed from larger than smaller lots. And what you'll see there at the end of the 2-year periods is the range from $125 for the smallest lots and just under $450 for the largest lots at the end of that 2-year period. Next slide. So the next slide shows the average water bill, and this is for, again, our average customer, so the 8 CCF customer, keeping in mind, of course, that 50% of our customers use 6 CCF or less. So what you'll see here, this is about 13 agencies. So if you wanted to be in the middle, you'd be at around 6.5, and we're around 5 or 6, if you look at us with Alameda County, we're you know, about the same right there. So about where we want to be, although inching up a little bit. And you can see that some of the agencies that we talked about that had either, you know, decided not to increase rates or haven't made a decision yet, you know, for example, Marin there are ones that that we just talked about on the slides of showing the impacts of other agencies. Next slide. This shows the same type of slide on the wastewater side. And again, as we've pointed out, we added several years ago a separation of the East Bay mud charge in blue from the total charge, because the total charge, the rest of the green, represents the collection system charges for Berkeley, Emeryville, Piedmont, and Oakland, and Stige, et cetera, all of the 7 satellites. And so, so what you'll see there again is that East Bay mud doesn't really control the largest part of that bill. And this is again calculated for a 6 CCF, which is the average user in the SD1 service area. Next slide. Just wanted to take a moment to talk about our draft Proposition 218 notice that was provided to the Board of Directors. So it's a very similar notice to what we had 2 years ago. And we are basically planning to mail this during April. The board has asked for expanded outreach, and we have received feedback that there's a desire for expanded outreach throughout our service area. And so over the last several months, staff has been out, I think at least one evening a week, and sometimes more, often with many of you board members as well present. We have planned about 16 meetings during this budget period to present externally to the public about our rates and charges. And we're about halfway through that series of 16 meetings. And one addition that we are going to make to the Proposition 218 notice is we're going to be adding information about 2 meetings that we're going to be holding on the 6th of May, one at noon and one in the evening. And so that'll give an opportunity for people who receive the Proposition 218 notice to take part of kind of a larger public meeting that essentially we have been holding previously here at the East Bay MUD headquarters, but will now be held virtually. Next slide. So just wanted to take a few minutes as we close out our workshop to talk about the non-Proposition 218 fees and capacity fees, because those will also be part of the rate and charge packets. Next slide. So again, we heard in November about the updated SCC study recommendations on the water side, which essentially updates our water use, which has fallen, as a result of the good work of our customers, our water conservation program, et cetera. And we also are creating a new category for small, under 500 square foot multifamily residential units. And that's based on data that we were able to work on with our consultant Stantec. And so overall, most of our SCCs will see a reduction of about 30%, which will be hopefully helpful to alleviating some of the housing crisis that we've seen in our region. Of course, there will be an impact to the budget, and that's been built in. On the wastewater capacity fee charge, just as a reminder, there will be an impact from the decrease in water use, since that affects wastewater as well. Next slide. So this just shows the proposed SCC single family residential rates, and it shows the current SCC and then the proposed. So you can see in Region 1, decrease from 18,100 to 11,705, a decrease in Region 2 from 31,350 to 18,811, a $40,040 in Region 3 down to 34,754. Next slide. This looks at the multifamily proposed rates. And again, what you'll see here is that there is this new MFR small dwelling units under 500 square feet. And so that's got an estimated water use of 95 gallons per day as opposed to 120 gallons per day. And you'll see there that fee in Region 1 will be 5,852, in Region 2, 8,510, and in Region 3, $6,738 for that new category. Next slide. Our non-residential rates by region for 5/8 inch meter have also been updated. And so you'll see here again, the decreases as a result of the change in methodology. In the next slide, you'll see here the proposed FY22 wastewater capacity fee updates. And so you'll see here single family and multifamily and the changes there. Next slide. This just shows the comparison of the proposed SCC for single family residential with other agencies. And so you'll see our current charges, and that's the blue line at the top. The next slide underneath in purple shows the East Bay MUD proposed charges. And then you'll see other agencies. And so again, you can see there in the region 3 that our new proposed charge is very much in line with others that are serving that area. And the decrease in region 1 with our peer agencies brings us a little bit closer there. Next slide. Just again, a note, particularly for members of the public, that there are many factors that can cause differences in connection charges. East Bay MUD does have a growth pays for growth approach, and also different agencies may choose different methodologies, buy-in, incremental, etc. And the decisions about how supply costs are included, the complexity of the system and age of facilities, water use per connection, and the amount of anticipated future growth are all encapsulated here. So the idea is just that everybody knows that every system is unique, and so it's very hard to compare apples to apples. Next slide. We did want to let the board know that there are other SCC program modifications that continue to be under review, specifically long-term financing of the SCC for Qualifying Community Benefits Project. So there is a current program that exists on the books that hasn't been used for a 2-year loan program. And we're currently working with the Office of General Counsel to understand what the possibilities, constraints, etc. are around having an expanded system. We know that there's interest out there, and we just want to make sure that there's a way to do that complies with law and that would allow us to look at a pilot. So we're working on that. Next slide. When the board votes on rates and charges, there will be other non-Prop 218 rates and charges included in the package. We want to make sure that we've got reasonable fees that are based on cost recovery, and so those will be in the May 11th package. Updates will be made to our water account establishment fee, special services charges, installation charges, Public Records Act fee charges, rec fee usage, water service regulations, and many of the wastewater fees for permits, etc. And those reflect our actual costs and staff time and costs. Next slide. We just wanted to give a brief update to our alternative to shutoffs. So one, as a reminder, flow restrictors are a last resort. We instead are focusing on increased outreach and assisting customers with financial hardship through our customer support programs. And again, we do have support for this in the budget. We want to maintain water service while East Bay MUD works with customers on financial arrangements and bill management through our CAP program, through payment plans, through extensions, of course, customers will still be responsible ultimately for water and wastewater charges. And our flow restrictor program costs are going to be funded as part of our customer service costs, just as we currently manage our delinquency approach as part of our overall customer service costs. And we also, for the first time, are going to be looking at, and in fact, implementing use of lien authority for owner-occupied homes. A question had been asked about the fixed monthly charges, and would there be a possibility for customers who were under flow restrictors to not pay or have a different fixed monthly service charge? So that would need to be revisited as part of a future cost of service study. And also as a reminder, we don't want people to be on flow restrictors at all, which is why we have this increased focus and outreach. And again, hopefully it will be for a very short time. And so essentially it signals delinquency while maintaining water service to meet very basic needs. So with that, we can move on to workshop conclusions. And the biennial budget, again, appropriation of $2.25 billion, of which 2/3 is capital investment related. Our budget priorities, as we started off, I think on our second or third slide, on the budget portion, continue investments in and maintenance of our aging infrastructure, continue with our plans for long-term financial stability, the 4% on both the water and wastewater side for fiscal years 22 and 23. And then on the next slide, just showing the schedule, we hope that we have provided sufficient information on the next slide to make decisions to move forward with issuance of the Proposition 218 notice. The plan would be to mail that during the month of April and to hold the public hearing on June 8th. We have set aside time on April 13th if there is more information that's needed after today, and that would change, of course, all of the other scheduling of the hearings, etc. So with that, I think that we're prepared to hear board comments.
And I think we have one public comment as well.
That's right. Why don't we hear from the public comment first? I think Eric was.
Eric,
ready.
are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Risha.
Okay.
The raise your hand function.
All right.
Sorry, Eric.
Your time is starting now.
Okay, thank you, Risha. Good morning, President Lenny and board members, General Manager Chan and staff. I am the president of AFSCME Local 444, and we would like to commend staff on sound long-term financial planning, allowing for lower than projected rate increases while continuing to maintain and rebuild our complex and aging infrastructure, reducing water loss and maintaining very high water quality and improved wastewater treatment services. AFSCME Local 444 does have ongoing concerns about continued use of fully maintained and operated contract services. We do appreciate management's ongoing efforts to reduce reliance on FM&O services and to continue to work with the local on further reducing FM&O contract services. We also have concerns about the barriers to entry of underrepresented members of our community, and will continue to work with management on development of entry-level positions and apprenticeship programs. AFSCME Local 444 supports the proposed budget and modest rate increases that are needed to continue to reliably and responsibly serve our customers by continuing to invest in our infrastructure and provide high-quality water and wastewater services to our community. We encourage you to adopt the proposed budget and rate increases to ensure the long-term financial stability of the district and continued investment in our employees and infrastructure and reliable, high-quality services to our customers and the community have come to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Any other public comment?
We have no other public comment.
All right. Board members, comments, questions? Seems like we covered most of the things and the questions as we went along.
Yeah, I would like to comment. I did initially have. Thank you. I did initially have a perspective that we would be better serving our customers with a 4 and 5 increase, and I thank the staff for presenting that picture to us. I still do have some of those reservations that we are kicking a little bit of the can down the road, but I reflect that we have, it could have been so much worse if we hadn't invested in real strategic planning to be on a better financial sustainability track. We would be facing much tougher decisions than right now. So after reviewing the materials and what's in the budget, I see that we are able to actually help transition into slower economic times with a 4 and 4 and being able to ramp up in future years. I think we will have more of a ramp up after this budget cycle by not doing 4 and 5. But I think that we will be able to still be sustainable doing the 4 and 4 as proposed. So I will be glad to support that, the budget. I also see that the current concept of being able to support the growth paying for growth in the SCC charges. We've been able to maintain that principle. That's our longstanding principle, but also facilitate these social benefit projects. Really enthusiastic about that innovation, and would encourage, as that work goes on, to also see what's happening in Berkeley and Oakland right now. We are seeing those two communities, and perhaps the state will provide new policy direction to go further in seeing up to 4 units on what's currently single household zoning in many communities. So I think that will be a future for much of our service area. And we should be thinking about what does it mean for a single homeowner to try to do an undertaking like that. Should we be thinking about what kind of financing are we able to provide at a reasonable value without undue cross subsidy, but still benefiting our customers? Do some of those principles apply to that context? I think that's kind of for further policy development, but think it's important to mention it as we focus on the social benefit projects. My last comment is on the FM&O, that obviously we have a solid budget number for dump trucks, but I think we do need to continue to look at, are we contracting out in excess of our MUD Act obligations, and would ask that the Leg HR committee I listen to those concerns as the budget year goes forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Andy. Other comments? I'll like to make a few myself. First, I think that the budget approach that we've taken, the cautious, realistic, and flexible watchwords are the appropriate ones. I think that this is a time where I think we're still trying to assess overall the impacts on the economy of the pandemic. We know that there's many customers who have been affected very significantly, and I think the efforts to keep our rate increases as low as possible are really important. At the same time, recognizing that we have a very significant amount of infrastructure upkeep and repair that we need to do, and that if we put that off too much, it's only going to cause more problems in the short term and more higher increases in the longer term. And so the increased emphasis on the CAP program and trying to help people that way, and keeping the overall increase modest to 4% and 4%, I think is the right approach. I do think that I've certainly agree with Andy, looking at what the choices are, that we've picked the right path for this and support this particular approach. I'm also would say that I'm very appreciative. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from some of the particularly affordable housing developers who have commented on our upcoming new SCC charges, and have said that those are very significant factors and going to be very beneficial to being able to build affordable housing within our district, and I really appreciate that. All right, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, and I was particularly sensitive to the fact that going 4, am I unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Going 4 and 4 makes a lot of sense. And in particular, we have time over the first year of the 2-year budget to take a second look if in fact we need to do anything going down the road. But this budget, I think, really addresses many of the concerns that I had for my constituents. And I believe that it does reflect an opportunity for us to move forward with the infrastructure, because I never want to lose sight of that. We cannot get behind on something we're already way behind on. And rebuild has to still be at the front end of where we're going. I think the other aspect of it is we'll have a chance to review the new normal, because if people are working at home, there may be a different pattern of water usage as it relates to that change. And that is going to be there. So we do have time, though, to look at it as we go forward, and we'll have at least 1 year experience in that area. So those are the things I just wanted to comment on. I agree with the 4-4.
All right, thank you, Bill. Lisa, I think you're next.
I agree with the 4-4. I was reluctant, but I think today's presentation sort of satisfied a lot of issues in my mind. And yes, going forward, we will have time to make any adjustments if we're required to do so. So I'm on board with the 4-4. And let me just sort of circle back to the centennial, because I agreed with Frank that perhaps it shouldn't be as robust as prior centennials, but I do really, I acknowledge and agree that it's a great accomplishment and that we should celebrate that great accomplishment. But I think in light of our current circumstances, we should just sort of pare it down, but we do need to share it with the community and with our staff.
Yeah.
So I'm on board with the centennial, but in some sort of pared down form. But back to the 4-4, I'm on board, and my questions and reluctance has been satisfied. Thanks.
Marguerite?
Yeah, I'm on board with 4-4 as well. I do think, I think all of us are probably feeling a little bit better than we were a few months ago. I know I am. I'm hopeful that we have the kind of recovery that people are talking about economically, and that at the same, and so being able to look a year from now makes sense. I think we're going to know a whole lot more, not just about our sort of financial condition, but we're going to know a lot more about our water condition at this time next year. And knock on wood, we're not in a multi-year drought situation, but that certainly would be more likely based on past experience than not. Rarely do these things come in 1 year buckets. They seem to come at least in 2 year buckets. So I appreciate the presentation today. Thought it was very thorough and thoughtful around the questions that we've had. And yeah. And it's a lower increase than we've done in quite a while. So I'm on board.
Thank you, Marguerite. Frank?
Likewise, the 4 and 4, I thought about it long and hard, and I don't see a way of avoiding it. If we're going to continue to not be reactive, but to be proactive to what we have to do, it's not a lot of money in terms of what's needed. I recognize that, and normally I'd be looking at Clifford and saying, I think you sharpened your pencil too much. But this time around, we really have to have a very sharp pencil and be very careful. Basically, I'm pretty tired of people saying, well, East Bay Mud, how much you gonna ding us for now? And it's like always, you guys always increase our rates, and what do? We have to cut back on water. Well, swell. And the last time I did a presentation with staff, I pointed out the cost of various things. And by the way, Clifford made a really good example of how much it costs for just a foot of pipe, $100. Think about that. I said all I'm going to say about the Centennial. With that, I don't know when we take a vote on this, but get that Prop 218 thing out there as quick as you can and save some postage.
Thank you, Frank. John?
I'll be really quick since we're over time. I applaud staff for driving down the numbers, and I think that is important to send to our customers, that we are aware of this economic situation that many people are facing, trying to get by right now. And hopefully we will go into an economic recovery soon and shortly. And I think we can demonstrate that we're doing the right thing by protecting our assets, and as well as making sure that we minimize potential spills and that sort that end up costing twice as much as it would have otherwise if we hadn't done the planning. So I'm on board with the staff proposal. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Any other comments? Looks like we have it covered.
Yep. So based on the board feedback, we will plan to mail out the Prop 218 notice in April. And again, I want to thank Sophia, her entire team, and everyone that worked on this budget. This was not easy to get to this point, but a lot of hard work. And we did, Director Mellon, we really sharpened that pencil this time.
All right. Thanks very much. So with that, our workshop is ended.